welcome. I'm Joanne Law, Director of Studies for Mediation Institute and co-founder of Interact Support. I'm on a mission to prevent violence by training and supporting dispute resolution practitioners. Mediation Musings is a series of conversations with mediators and for mediators. So if you're interested in dispute resolution, follow the channel. We're intending to update new recordings each week. Enjoy. I'd like to really welcome you today, Sue. So I've got Sue Armstrong from Armstrong Mediation, who tells me she's a former law academic and researcher. Sue's a mediator and family dispute resolution practitioner. Is that correct, Sue?
It is, but always there's more. Yes. Also a collaborative professional, so a collaborative coach in the collaborative practice process.
Yes.
And also I work for Relationships Australia. I mediate for them in the Relationships Australia mediation service, so property and kids together.
Okay, excellent. So you're doing both property and parenting.
Yep.
Excellent.
Yeah, and also, and I'm sure we'll come on to it later, but other family disputes. So I'm enjoying helping people work out where does mum best placed in her retirement, those kind of things.
Oh, okay. Yes, that's right, because you're doing some elder mediation now.
Yes, and yeah, just anything that concerns families and where they might benefit from a mediation process to make a decision.
Oh, that's great. Well, we might explore that a little bit more, because I know that a lot of people are really interested in that that sort of family style mediation, and maybe haven't actually ventured there or don't feel comfortable to. So yeah, that'd be interesting to get your reflections on that and the difference between the sort of thing that we do as in family dispute resolution with couples that are separating.
Sure.
So it's I think you're doing some individual coaching as well. What's that about?
So sometimes sometimes people aren't ready for mediation. Sometimes the other party won't participate.
Mm-hmm.
So people often will benefit from what I call separation coaching, which might be, it's not there is perhaps an element of that. It's really an opportunity for guided self-reflection to get clarity about what your goals are, how you might achieve those. Sometimes what is it that the other party, how do I put myself in the other party's shoes? What if that might assist me to work out what it is I'm needing to do? So it's really a process of guided self-reflection and goes for as long as people might need it. But it's a future-oriented process, kind of built on the conflict coaching model, but also I incorporate, and I might talk about this later too, kind of principles of what I call compassionate communication.
Okay. No, that sounds very interesting. So, look, just for a bit of background for people, so they sort of understand where you've come from. So, how did you get into this industry, and what would you like to share around that?
Yeah, well, look, actually, I was originally a mediation skeptic, so I did my my PhD on the role of women's legal services in family law reform, and particularly around their contribution to the 1995 amendments to the Family Law Act, which were really quite significant.
Yep.
And mediation at that time was probably fairly new and young, and being a feminist and listening to the voices of many feminists who are working in community legal centres supporting women in that context, mostly separated women. There was a sense of, and a lot of the literature said, mediation, domestic violence don't go together. And I think in particular Hilary Astor's work for the national, I've forgotten the name of the body, but she wrote a paper where she said, well, actually often it's about women's agency here. And yes, of course we need to be very cautious. We need to properly assess and assess not only for the presence but the risk, the level of risk in domestic violence. We also need to speak with the woman concerned, if it's a woman who's the victim here, and ask, her to make an informed decision. So we need to talk about mediation, what the pros and cons are, what the pros and cons of sitting in the room might be, and what women's legal services, in particular Queensland Women's Legal Services, have since developed, because they had many clients coming to them saying, we want to mediate. We don't want to go to court, can't afford it, and we want to mediate. There are many reasons why women might want to do that. So Women's Legal Services in Brisbane, under the leadership of Rachel Field, developed a model of mediation, of supported mediation for domestic violence perpetrators and survivors. And that was incorporated into the Coordinated Family Dispute Resolution Project, which the federal government funded and did pilots across the country in 2011, I think. They haven't since funded it, but a lot of people have used those principles and adapted them or incorporating them. And I think there's a lot of value there. So whilst I was a mediation skeptic originally, both the development of the industry and our, particularly since the introduction of FDR and the whole sector's understanding of domestic violence and how common it is among separated couples who cannot work out their own resolution, which most people actually do, and to see the great benefit of, to see the benefit, to understand the sector's sophistication now and how we deal with that. But also I think, and I did a lot of research around culturally responsive family dispute resolution, so I was working and teaching and presenting in this area. But also I experienced mediation myself and I went, that feels good.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm really valuing being heard here. Yeah. And I'm really valuing the support of somebody providing a structured process to settle me and to allow me to have a voice, but also to hear what it is going on for the other person. So it's a combination of all of those things. And now I'm a bit of a, not a skeptic, but I'm very passionate about it. I think it's got great value in so many ways.
Yeah, but I think the point you made early on about the importance of self-determination is a really critical one. We need people to be able to make an informed decision, particularly vulnerable people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of a process like developed under the Coordinated Family Dispute Resolution model, because firstly, it taught people what mediation was, taught them to express and supported them in developing communication capacity to express their views, had the support of a co-worker. He had a men's worker, she had her own DV support worker, and you had several other patients in the room, and it was a case managed model. So it was a very safe, it didn't work for everybody obviously, but so we can adapt our processes to suit the needs of people and we can affirm them. And a number of people said in the research evaluation, I learned, I was really pleased because I developed a parenting plan and I felt heard, and whilst I was a little bit fearful, it was a really got positive experience. And so I think, of course, we can support people to make decisions, but sometimes it takes the right process and support people to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So flexibility is one of my very high values, and adapting processes to suit the individual clients is really important. I agree in that. The other thing that I thought was really interesting that we need to all remember, it's not about the competence of the client in an individual situation that they kind of need mediation. You're a highly articulate, confident woman, and the use of mediation in your situation. It's the same for all of us. We need someone who's not part of the problem sometimes to help with that communication.
I asked my son to leave home recently because it wasn't working for any of us, and in the end we had a three-way mediation including my daughter, so that we all had the chance to safely and responsibly and honestly and respectfully express what was going on for us and what do we want. And it was wonderful because it actually gave me, and I think the kids too, a sense of, we can communicate responsibly. And often it's so difficult with the people closest to us. That's where our triggers are, that's where we don't regulate ourselves, that's where we're reactive. And so, we all can benefit from mediation sometimes.
Absolutely, and the elder mediation's another point in case, because you've got all of that sibling stuff
Oh,
that
now happy
comes
to talk
out.
about that if you like, if that's something that
Yeah,
interests.
yeah, I'd be really interested to find out a little bit more about your experiences there.
Yes, and so my experience is just as you said, and in fact, obviously, I said most people who separate, about 80%, I think, the research tells us, with a little bit of help, they sort it out themselves. And about 20% of us, 20% of people need some kind of professional support. And there's complexity among those 20%, all sorts of things, DV, drug and alcohol, all sorts of perhaps personality disorders, or just a great deal of emotion. But that's a relationship. Relationships very often aren't 50 years old. When you work with siblings, not only do you have a complex family dynamic that is possibly 50 plus years old, you've got at times the number of siblings in the room, and so it's multiply complex. And and so I really love that, because very often we continue those patterns that we learned unless we're really mindful and reflective that we learned as children, and we carry those on into our adult relationships, especially with our siblings. And I think sibling relationships, for example, are very complex. And you get that in business, you get that making decisions about where should mum go now that she's not so well, and a whole lot of other areas. And so I love doing it, but it's I think actually up a notch in complexity.
Yes.
And sometimes then it also means extra length, but if it's managed well, not necessarily. So I really love that work.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I don't think it's something that necessarily novices should take on straight away.
No, not initially.
Or perhaps as a co-mediation model with someone who's got a bit more experience.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Might be a good way, or even people transitioning into there. So actually, speaking of novice or new mediators, it's something I always like to ask people that have got more experience. What do you have any advice for people that are entering the industry?
Yeah. I think it can be really hard to get in for a start, to become a practicing FDRP. I know that a number of people have contacted me who've done the training who are finding it quite challenging to get the hours that they need. So that's often thinking that through and having real clarity about how you might do that. And then also, how is it? Because I think a lot of people are drawn to this work, because they can see its great benefits. It's professionally and personally very satisfying. You're really enabling and supporting people, and you're drawing on a very, very broad skill set with often very good results. So it's a shame there's not more opening. Family relationship centres provide that, and so do some other organisations. So that's one choice. So thinking about it, where is it and how is it I want to work? Setting up your own practice, I think, is really challenging as a young, or not necessarily young, but as a new FDRP and or mediator. So if you, and like most things, it's the more experience you are able to get, better with
the more confidence you have, and
confidence, competence, the more you see, particularly co-mediate, how others do it, and the more we learn. So it's that 10,000 hour thing. Not that I'm suggesting you need that before you need to practice by yourself or set up a business, but the more opportunity you can get to do that in different fora. I haven't looked recently at what the work the CJCs are doing, but certainly that also provides an opportunity to do mediation. So in all sorts of ways, trying to get that experience up. And if you are thinking of becoming a private mediator, then one of the big gaps in my knowledge was, how do you run a business? And I'm still gnashing my teeth over that sometimes. It's been an adventure. So that's something I'd also suggest you get a little bit of know-how about.
Yeah. Oh, look, absolutely. And at Mediation Institute, we're a mediator accreditation body, and some of our professional development is really focused around that business. So we've got a practice development mastermind where we're trying to bring people together that are building their businesses to pool knowledge. And some of our people do have a track record of very experienced business owners and managers in other industries that can come across, and some have only ever worked for someone. And there's a lot to learn that's nothing to do with the work. Okay. So, no, thank you for that. And it's yeah, I agree. It's very true. It can be quite challenging, and we've yeah, we found that it was very difficult to get placements in the industry, and have set up our own not-for-profit so we can make sure our students do get their
Just in
50
terms
hours.
of how any other advice is, I guess it's just extending that. Get as much practice as you can and reflect on it. Really take a really reflective approach. If you can observe others, there's so much learning in working with others, and so just try to pull on that and really develop and refine and reflect on how it is you're going and where you could improve, because that's clearly something we can all do. And you often, when you're working alone, don't have those opportunities. So the more you can do that, I think the better professional you'll become.
Yeah, absolutely. I think experienced mediators don't realise the amazing benefits that you actually get from mentoring someone.
Yep. Yep.
It's not a one-way street at all. I'm sure you've done some co-mediation and mentoring in your career.
I learn something every time.
Yeah.
Oh, is that how people? Oh, that's a really good idea. Or okay,
Mm.
yeah. So it's
Yes, that's right. When people ask you why did you do that? Oh, okay, why did I do that? And having to unpack learned practice can be really
yeah.
quite
And I think
profound as
there's a
well.
beautiful one of the booklets that Jen McIntosh developed when FDR was first being established in 2006. She and Laurie Maloney had the CD, and it's this green book. I've forgotten the name of it.
The doors.
No, it's not doors.
No, it wasn't
It
doors.
had
It
a
was.
CD, and it had a number of vignettes where they were modelling mediation practice.
Ah, okay.
And many people will know what I'm talking about, and if people can, I'll track down the title because I've got a couple. AG's provided them for free, they've run out. But the beauty of this was it actually had a column where the mediators were working and thinking through what was it I was saying, and then this column of this is what I was thinking. So it really unpacked the process, because as you say, we often don't. It's like most things, we get into a routine and we do things simply because that's the way we come to do them. But it's just a wonderful illustration of really what's going on underneath, and we all know we're managing juggling a lot of things. It's one of the most complex things I've done, actually, because you have to be so present in the room to yourself and to the parties, as well as to, okay, where are we up to? What's happening emotionally? What question do I need to ask here? And what impact might I have? So you're really holding many, many things.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, that's interesting. One of the things you mentioned earlier was culturally responsive FDR. I'd love you to expand a little bit more on what you mean by that, and what your sort of research and investigations told you about.
Yeah, look, I was really, really lucky. I worked at University of Western Sydney for 20 years as a family law academic, as did Tom Altabelli, although he wasn't there for quite the same time as I was. When he left to go to the judiciary, he said, would you like to be involved in this research project? And so I was very, very lucky to be part of a consortium with Anglicare and Catholic Care, who applied to manage 2 FRCs. And they successfully tendered for that. And part of their brief and their intention was to develop a model of culturally responsive family dispute resolution. And so I partnered with 2 organisations in Western Sydney, 2 FRCs in Western Sydney, me as a representative of the university, and did some research about, well, what does that look like? And I didn't speak with a lot of clients, but I spoke with a lot of FDRPs, a lot of culturally based and faith-based organisations about what is it that you think would really support your clients, and how can we develop that? My conclusions were, look, everybody's different. There's no way that as professionals we can understand everything we need to know about culture, and there's a beautiful paper by a British academic who's done some work in this area, who actually doubts that we can ever understand the nuance involved in interspousal relationship at the time of separation and how people negotiate. And I think there's a large deal of truth there. But if we're mindful of our own cultural context and what it we're bringing to the table, all the assumptions that we make, particularly if we're from a dominant cultural context like I am.
Yes.
If we're really respectful of this individual and ask them questions, and this is where I take issue with Doors, actually, because I think Doors has a question up front about, is there anything about your culture and religion you would like us to know? Many people can't articulate that. I think it's really important to have it there and as a reminder, but it's listening to people's narrative and being respectfully curious and pulling a little bit out there, and because often, as I said, people can't articulate something.
No.
So at a time of vulnerability, so precious to them, but also because they're in the cultural.
That's right. Yeah. How do you describe something that's all you know?
Not always a conscious thing. So being aware, being respectful, making respectful and curious inquiries about what's going on for that individual. Where might indeed culture be, because it may not be relevant to somebody necessarily. How is it relevant to you? How is your faith relevant? Is there anything that we could do to adapt that? Is there anything as a professional I might do to ensure there's capacity to freely negotiate in the room, that people have enough support? So I think it's a multifaceted approach. I don't think there's one way of doing it. So when I said culturally responsive model, it's actually, the model is to be respectful to everybody you meet and don't make assumptions. But inquire, be curious and inquire. Certainly have it up front as something you are wanting to inquire and to think about, and then consider how might that be adapted to this person. And that can be difficult because it might be a resource-based thing. Certainly now working with, and I didn't do any work specifically with Indigenous communities, my work was largely in relation to what we call culturally and linguistically diverse communities, so people whose first language is not English, who were born generally in his first language is I guess is the fair common denominator. And what then can we do? And there's a lot of things we can do in terms of connecting them with their own organisations if they're not necessarily connected to them as well, involving them if they need, providing opportunities for people to work with family. I wasn't involved in all. I think there's a place for, so depending on people's need and who's involved in the decision making, who's going to be involved in the care of the children, is it appropriate to have those people involved? Do the couple want those people involved in any decision-making process? So it's really about listening to what's going to support these people to make a decision.
No, look, absolutely. And, you know, in some cultures, the parents aren't the decision maker or the main decision or the only decision makers about a child. There are other family members that everyone in that culture acknowledges has the right to be part of that decision making. And
appreciating the nuance of that negotiation process, and that's where some knowledge is helpful, but only as a starting point, to maybe make further investigation, to inquire to that person, to see if there are any other faith-based or cultural-based organisations that might be able to provide some assistance or support here if it's necessary. And being really mindful of that. And I mean, now often the term is called cultural safety, and I appreciate that that's really what this is all about. So it's about how do we ensure, fundamentally it's that question of how do we ensure that people can freely negotiate. And it's going to be different in everyone's context, but that's part of who we are, and we need to be aware of its influence on how we communicate, how we negotiate, what the role of gender here is. I mean, there's many pieces moving pieces.
Absolutely.
And receive them and adapt and respond to them.
Yeah, and I guess cultural safety is kind of like a minimum standard. We don't want to be culturally unsafe, but culturally responsive is a higher standard where we're, in a way that's appropriate for that couple, those people.
Yeah, I think it's knowing quite right, knowing all of that. This is cultural awareness begins with, but then that's cultural responsiveness. What is my role and responsibility as a professional here to ensure that this person is able to fully participate in this process and get the outcome that's best for them? And how much of the nuance and the dynamic of their own context obviously is more than culture, but of their own context do I need to take on board here, and how can I adapt in different ways to support both parties in this?
Yeah, absolutely. And well, it comes back to one of our basic skills as mediators, isn't it? Not making assumptions.
Yep.
So, you know, we see someone with a hijab, we don't just, you know, assume anything because it can, you know, her choice to wear that, you know, that style of clothing or religious symbolism can you know, can stem from a variety of different perspectives.
And what I love at the moment, and some people, you know, I started this work in 2008, and but there's some organisations, Bankstown FRC has now developed a model that they're using, and that was one of the organisations I was first working with. Legal Aid has trained and supported mediators from diverse backgrounds to work with parties, and sometimes that's what people want, but sometimes it's not. Certainly sometimes having the same linguistic framework and cultural context can work beautifully, where parties also understand that's what's going on. So we've really increased the sophistication. The other thing that's beautiful is many new FDRPs, and I think there's been some government support to train them, are coming through now and bring their own cultural context, but they also need a great deal of awareness because they're not representative of any culture.
No, that's the danger, isn't it? To assume that people
being aware of all of those things.
are like me. That's, yes.
So yes, I think rule number 1 and probably number 10 is don't make assumptions and be self-aware.
Yeah, self-awareness is and that comes back to that reflective practice, which is a theme that's coming through in all of these conversations that I'm having.
The other thing I think, Joanne, you talked about self-determinism. In the end, we're all the experts in our own lives, and the parties are the ones to be making the choices here about what it is they want, who they may wish to consult or not, and what's going to best support them. And so it's really working closely with them and having sufficient resources organisationally or personally to be able to adapt your process to really maximise that self-determination.
Yeah, actually, one of the key words I heard from you before was respect, and that's actually a really difficult word because for some people it means something actually really quite authoritarian and respect for elders, and for others it means something much more mutual. How would you define respect?
Well, I was thinking actually as you're talking, because it's one of the key elements, is actually asking the parties, what does respect look like to you?
Yeah.
And then if I was asked that, it's really about allowing, recognising that other person's, that they matter, and behaving in a way that allows their voice to be present. And so as a mediator, I have to, and this is where compassionate communication or what's often called nonviolent communication or NVC is really helpful, because it's a beautiful process which has its own mediation model, but really slows down the process, helps people to get in touch with what's going on, what the feeling is. And someone might be really angry or irritated or frustrated, and acknowledging that, okay, so I'm hearing that you're really frustrated, Joanne. You're sounding a bit frustrated, is that right? And I'm wondering, are you wanting some clarity or understanding about what's going on for you? And yes, and then I shift to the other party and say, and so I'm wondering, Tom, could you reflect back that Joanne's really needing some understanding here? It doesn't mean you have to agree with them, just acknowledge that that's what they're... So really, I suppose respect and empathy are very closely linked. And it's just recognising our own individual dignity in the end, and responding and behaving in a way that illustrates it.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful, and it quite closely aligned to my interpretation of respect as well. But it is one of those sorts of words can actually have a lot of underlying meaning, and I guess as mediators, it's often really important to unpick what you mean, because someone might say in mediation, I don't feel respected. So how would you know if you were? What does that what does it feel like, or
so you're really longing to be heard, or you're longing to
not just assuming our interpretation of that word is going to be what's intended, and which is exactly what you were talking about in that compassionate communication. But you're describing compassionate communication as a process.
Yes.
And is that what you're meaning, as you're giving us a little example there of...
Well, I talked about nonviolent communication, and that is, it's kind of I don't know whether you ever come across it, but It's got a worldwide, I was going to say, adherence of across the world. They have conferences every year and they're fantastic to go to. But it's a model of communication which invites us to really start with what's going on for us. You know, how am I feeling here? Oh God, I'm feeling really, where is that feeling? And it feels really yucky, and I'm feeling really, really angry. I'm really pissed off, you know. And then that sense of, okay, so that's just a starting point. But what does that feeling, what need does that point to? What kind of universal need? Oh, I'm feeling angry because really I want to be, could be 1,000 things, but say it's I want to be heard, you know, or I want to be understood. And so the feeling points to the need. And then the need, once you've got that, I really want to be understood, because I heard you say, I'm not being respected here, but I'm really needing some respect. Would you be willing? And then the next step is a request, a request that is really responsible. Would you be willing, Joanne, to pause and listen to what I've got to say, because I'm really needing some respect. So that I'm needing some respect. So would you be willing to do this, because that's what's going to support it? And could you then maybe reflect back what it is you've heard me say? So it is a process, and it's a process built on empathy and fundamentally compassion, but also self-awareness and responsibility for clean communication and specific requests. And it's huge. It changed my life. My kids often tell me I should get my money back because I don't always practice it as much as I put at home. But it's very powerful, very simple, very powerful. And I'm sure there are lots of other models that are very similar, but this has a very big foundation and support, and as I said, a specific model of mediation based on it. So it's
okay. So if listeners were wanting to find out more about that model, is there anywhere you could direct them to?
Google NVC, nonviolent communication, compassionate communication. Marshall Rosenberg is the American who first developed it in the, I think, late 60s, early 70s. He's now, he died a couple of years ago. But you'll come across a huge amount of stuff, lots of really good stuff on the web. And Liv Larson is a Finnish woman who has done a lot of work, as have others, around NVC and mediation.
Okay.
John Kinyon is also another one, Kinyon, I think, or AN. He's fantastic too.
Okay, well, I might put some links through in your
and I'll send you some too.
Yeah, oh, that'd be great. Yeah, so what I'm intending is to just put a post on the Mediation Institute with any links or further information that sort of might spring out of our chat that make it easy for people. So I'm just mindful of time. So I guess. For people that are listening, are there any sort of final points or takeaways that you'd really like people to reflect on?
I think we've touched on them all. It's self-awareness as mediators. What are we bringing to the table? It has to start there.
Yeah.
I often begin my own practice with, just a 5-minute connecting to myself and what's going on for me. What am I hoping to bring to this mediation? So not just the brain, but the heart and the body. Really kind of connect with myself so that I'm in a really clear space and can really then be very present for others. Because as I said, I have found it one of the most challenging areas of professional work that I've done because of that need to be so deeply present.
Yeah.
To be compassionate in the way we communicate. And so that's about our own sense of what's going on for us. How do we communicate that clearly? But how then do we hear the other? Respect we've talked about, and self-determination, and it's a very dynamic, volatile mix, but if we can work to facilitate all of that, then I think we're doing a really good job.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on that, you're working at Relationships Australia. It's you'd be seeing a lot of clients. Do you have any tips for people on after the mediation? How do they let go of those sort of emotional connections and
yeah, look, it's a big thing. Often when I don't have a successful mediation, and often that's we didn't reach agreement. It's probably when I spend more time reflecting on what could I have done better? Was this really appropriate? Which question did it go sideways? Where should I have parties, whatever. So often there's when we so-called failure can encourage self-reflection, and that's I'm not talking about failing. So I just think it's really important both. So how do we work through it? Is to stop and pause and reflect. The reflective practice is really important. If you've got the opportunity to debrief with somebody else, that's always great. We're busy and we often don't. So, but personal self-reflection, and I think that builds up our own sense of confidence and just really connecting in with what's going on for us. How am I feeling after that mediation? Do I feel a bit sad or disappointed or really excited that I enabled these two to really reach a satisfying agreement? So I think we have to be really mindful of our own self-care. You know, working and from someone from a legal background, not so familiar with working with another professional in a supervisory capacity.
Yeah.
But even Jen McIntosh does that, and so she's, you know,
yeah.
In addition to which she said, I think someone asked her once, dark chocolate, red wine and black humour helps, but the importance of supervision, and that can be peer supervision. So I love some of the work that you're doing. Yeah. So I think there's lots of different ways we can set that up and be supportive of one another. That's the other thing I loved about the mediation community as opposed to some other legal fields. They're all very friendly, mostly. And supportive and so much passion about the industry that they want it to succeed. So it's a really lovely bunch of people, including the legal academics. And I must put a plug in for all of the wonderful people I've worked for. And if you haven't connected to the Australasian Dispute Resolution Research Network, there's a fantastic blog that and some really, really good work on there that engages with lots of really contemporary issues around dispute resolution. So
they're putting out some
that's a really good place to start too. So you're doing all of those things, I think, but that self-connection and awareness, following what it is we've done.
Yeah, and I think just, you know, you mentioned at the start, but at the end, just tapping into your body and just making sure you know, if you are coming out with a yucky feeling because it didn't go as well as you'd hoped, to recognise that and be willing to sort of let that go.
And being aware of the connection between the body and the mind.
Yeah.
You know, what it is, what practices, whether it's, I was talking to someone yesterday about tapping. I haven't done tapping, but apparently that's marvellous too. And there's many, you know, going for a walk. What is it that consciously and mindfully that will help us, you know, let it go? And that can be sometimes simply throwing it over our shoulder. So there's many different things we can do, but it's about consciousness and awareness and self-care. Yeah.
Yeah, no, well, that's a really good place to finish on, I think. So.
Be kind to ourselves if we think we didn't do such a good job.
Yeah, exactly. And remember, you know, it's their lives and their choices ultimately, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, look, that's wonderful. Thank you. I'm sure the listeners are going to get so much out of this chat, and thank you once again for sharing.
Thank you. As a former academic, I can quite easily talk under wet cement, Joanne. So thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity myself to reflect on what it is I do, because that's part of what we do, and it's lovely to be able to be speaking about it. So thanks.